All right, looks like we have a pretty good crowd, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Once again, my name is Stephen Smith. I'm co-founder and CEO of IntelliSpark. I've worked in education technology for about 30 years, and I co-founded a company called Naviance that's now owned by PowerSchool and currently serve on the board of Common Application in addition to my work at IntelliSpark. And I'm joined today by my friend, Boston University professor, Scott Solberg. Scott, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everybody. So nice to be joining. Professor at Boston University, where I co-direct the Center for Future Readiness, and we really focus on how to support youth in navigating their different opportunities. That's based on their talent, skills, and the different opportunities in the marketplace. So, looking forward to the conversation today.
Thanks, Scott. And so Scott and his team at the Center for Future Readiness at BU's Wheelock College of Education and Human Development also recently launched a podcast titled Take a Moment for Youth. The initial episode of that podcast is titled Showing Up, and it focused on absenteeism and served as inspiration for today's discussion. We'll add a link to the podcast in the chat window and include it in the resources we make available after the session. Scott joins us today to highlight some current research and best practices in one of the most critical areas schools continue to struggle with, absenteeism, and especially chronic absenteeism. Our session will start with a very short introduction to the issue, followed by Q&A with Scott for about 45 minutes. We've received a number of questions in advance that we'll use as a guide, and I'll also be watching the Q&A tab in Zoom and encourage you to pose your own questions, and we'll attempt to weave those into the conversation. We know that ensuring both students and staff are healthy socially and emotionally is at the core of many issues affecting schools, including absenteeism rates. And at IntelliSpark, we help schools to create an environment where more students can come ready to learn and to thrive. Our members include hundreds of public and private schools across the US that use us to improve the delivery of student support services. And we recently introduced a new product that adds expanded features for tracking and managing absenteeism issues in IntelliSpark Pro, including period level attendance. If you're interested in learning more about IntelliSpark and the solutions we offer, including IntelliSpark's chronic absenteeism module, please reach out to me directly at stephen.smith@intellispark.com or fill out the Contact Us form on our website at intellispark.com/contact. The session is being recorded, and we will send a video link within the next few days to everyone who registered. We'll also email a certificate of attendance to those who joined us live. Please don't hesitate to pose any questions you have in the Q&A, and we'll do our best to moderate. And with that, we have a lot to cover today, so I'd like to pass the floor to Scott to share a few thoughts before we get into the discussion.
Okay. Well, welcome everyone, and we're hoping you will throw in your questions, some of the concerns you're having, clarifications on things we may be discussing today. I just wanted to kind of start with the basic that we know, right? This when COVID hit, everything was disrupted, and we're still kind of feeling the disruption even now. I think we've had a hard time as a society recognizing just what a traumatic event this whole thing was. And so when we're getting back to work, getting back to school, it's sort of a desire to get back to the normal when we really don't have that normal anymore. And I think our youth are also experiencing this tremendously, but I think our educators were also experiencing it. So getting through the day is getting through the work, but we're not necessarily thriving as professionals. And I think our youth are still being challenged with now realizing, what's the whole point? If at any point we're going to shut down the world, if at any point I could lose a job or my parents are losing their jobs, as we're seeing now constantly, there's a sense of kind of meaninglessness that's happening. And so part of the discussion, or as we talk about chronic absenteeism, is how do we really help youth find some sense of meaning and purpose for education? How do we as educators really build a relational connection with our youth so they find a sense of belonging and a sense of that they're being heard and listened to, and just really that they're valued? These become some of the core pieces, and we've got some tools to help with some of that. But I just want to give that kind of perspective that I think we're still moving through this kind of trauma, and we need to be able to take some ownership as professionals as well as in this role, how we can support our youth and how we can support ourselves through this as well. So it's not going to be a single here's the answer. I think it's going to be multiple strategies that we need to consider. Oh, Steve, I didn't hear you.
So that's certainly an important context, and I appreciate your sharing that. As we kind of launch into this discussion, one question that I have is, as you said, this goes back to COVID,
Mhm.
and so it's been an issue for a number of years, 5 years or so since the pandemic.
Yeah.
What's keeping us from making more progress more quickly?
Well, as I started to say, I think part of it is that we're all as adults, we're still kind of reeling from all of that. It was a tremendous disruption to our daily lives. And then in getting back, especially as educators, there's the pressure to kind of get back into the learning mode. We come back to schools, many of which have fewer educators, fewer support systems. We're seeing schools all over the country that are struggling with the economic conditions, so we're not getting all of the kind of supports we might need. As a result, I think as educators, we kind of start just getting the work done, right? So we just got to teach math and let's just get the math done. Let's get the reading done. And it's hard to do the kind of social emotional learning supports that we know are effective in helping youth connect to school, connecting with the families. It's just we're struggling in so many different ways. And I think at the end of the day too, our students are also struggling. And I think we need to kind of figure out for them where are the mental health needs that they have, what is the meaning that they're bringing to the school system, and how do we help them find new meaning and new sense of purpose for why education will support them in their lives. And I think that that's kind of where the challenges are. I think that's part of the process of the complexity. So we have to stop thinking that we're just going to get back to normal. I think we have to create now new innovations to figure out how we can connect, but also find new innovative ways to help youth get to the learning targets we want them to have, which may not involve sitting for 7 hours a day. There may be other alternative pathways and other opportunities for learning and engagement that we need to start really considering to bring in as we're working with our youth, and specifically as we're working with some of our higher risk populations.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. And we'll come back to this, I think, a little bit later in the conversation, but and I don't want to put words in your mouth, so please correct me if I am. But it sounds like that while this issue may look like it sort of is COVID, and there is certainly an overhang from COVID, a lot of things changed in the last several years that have also made this issue harder to address. The context in which schooling happens has changed. The sort of permission structure for missing things in person
Hmm.
has
Yeah.
changed, and that's not unique to what schools are experiencing.
Right. And it's not something that we're just experiencing in the United States, right? This is a global issue that's happening. And so we have to also recognize that we're all kind of involved in this really a loss experience in terms of our of what we had before. And how are we going to get back to something that's going to have to be different, but it still can be meaningful and really important for us.
Yeah. So can we talk about causes a little bit that for individual students to
Hmm.
not be in school? We tend to look at absenteeism as this indicator that's sort of rolled up into a number. It's the number
Right.
of days absent or the percent of days missed. But there
Right.
can be many different reasons why even the same student is missing different days of school. So, can you help us understand what some of the research tells us about what those reasons might be?
Yeah, and I think let me give a little story, and I may have talked about this in the past, but I probably have. But when we were working in Milwaukee, and we had all these students coming in late, and we had the truancy rate was huge, and we had a 50% mobility rate. So by the end of the year, half our students had moved on to somewhere else, right, and were replaced with another half. So a very transient group. But in that, you had a high chronic absenteeism rate, even back in the early 2000s. And one of the things that we did was we kind of created this weird dynamic where they had to come into the building if they were late, go to the cafeteria. They had to fill out of a little form that just said, "Why am I late? What's getting in the way here?" And then we also played this awful music. It was the most noxious music known to humankind. And sure enough, that really helped reduce that kind of truancy rate because it meant that they weren't going to want to listen to the music, so they were getting to school on time. But what really happened out of it, what was so transformative was the assistant principal, Charles Siebert at the time, just wrote everything down on an Excel file and then brought it into the administration meeting and said, "Look at this." And what they found were lots of different reasons. They found that students really cared about education, but they couldn't get to school, right? Many of them, we're talking about the high risk, high need youth populations now. They had to drop their brother off at the bus, and by dropping them off, they would be late to get onto their bus. There were just things happening that they were not aware of. And so my first thing is we have to recognize that there's multiple causes. Certainly, there's students that are staying home because anxiety, mental health, not having structure at home. Mom and dad, maybe just a mom, maybe a dad and mom, but maybe they're working during the morning hours, and so they're not there to support the getting into school. There's so many different things happening within that space. that we have to be able to account for. It's not a single cause in that way. But I do think that what I will say though is we found that when the students found a meaningful reason for being in school, when we built a relational base with the students where they felt cared about, supported, and knew that they belonged here in school, that this was the place in their community where they felt the most connection. They came to school no matter what. They were coming in rainstorms. They were just begging to get in. If they were late, they were begging to get in the door. We had so many stories that were just, the principals were just shocked at how these students were mobilizing. They would move away because low-income families, they end up having to move a lot. They would take 2 and 3 buses to get back to that school because that's where they knew that this is the place they wanted to be. So I do believe that there are multiple causes, but I think the solution base is pretty similar in that it's how do we make sure we're building a connection, that every single youth in our building has an adult connection, that we're really having authentic conversations and relationships with our students where they it's not just saying how are you doing, they really experience us as wanting to care and support for them. And yes, it takes a little time away from the learning. But when we build that base and they know that we really do care about them, that leverages more of their interest and engagement in the learning process. The last thing they want to do is let down that educator who they know cares and really wants to support them. So those are the kind of the defining things that we do have to do that kind of mapping. We've got to find out within our school what are all of the reasons that we can account for as to what might be going on and try to start coming up with some sample programs and strategies. And there are some really good ones that can help with that process. And at the end of the day, we have to focus on when we get them in the building, we control everything. We don't have to worry about lack of family support, economics. When they're in our building, how are we designing this experience to be something that's meaningful and important for them in a place where they know they belong?
Yeah, no, so important. And we know that there's so much really that depends on a student feeling a sense of connection and protection really at school, that there's someone there who cares about them. And that has impact not just in their mental health, but also in their literally in their ability to achieve academically. So,
Yeah, yeah,
um, so here's a question, maybe a little bit controversial, and just is something that I've heard other parents talk about, which is there ever such a thing as a beneficial absence? Like we paint this, issue of absenteeism with a pretty broad brush. Like it's bad to be out of school, and there are lots of reasons why it's bad to be out of school. But are there times where students might actually get a beneficial experience somewhere other than school? And do schools need to think differently about that?
yeah. That's such an interesting question. Well, let me give an example, like because I know it is a controversial one. So I'll give one example that everyone will say, "Oh, well, that's just a one-off," and it probably is. But there was this person that went to my high school about 5 or 6 years before I did. His name was Steven Spielberg, and Steven Spielberg did not show up to school. He was busy at home making movies, right? And so there's an example of someone who found other alternatives, very smart, did not fit into that normal school day. Also, other issues around, we have schools that have, in terms of racial dynamics and other kinds of things that got in the way, and he's talked about those. But basically, he had a plan and he had a sense of learning and what needed to happen. I also think that in addition to that, we have a lot of smart students, and I always go on the idea that there's a lot more intelligence and a lot more ability than we may be seeing, right? Even if their grade levels in terms of math and reading are down, I know they have more potential. So the question becomes what context is going to support them best? And maybe that context is getting into an alternative setting where they have some work that they're doing, outside the school. They're doing career tech. Career tech ed becomes a great opportunity because it has that hands-on piece, right? But there may also be online learning that's going to allow them to move quickly when they have a goal that they want. These kids can learn through YouTube. They can learn through their education. My son was one who just passed his GED with a 3.5 grade point average, but couldn't sit in a classroom. But he just walked in and took the test and scored. He didn't prepare for them. He just knew the information because he got it in a different way. And so I think that's the other thing we have to look at is where are there opportunities where we have smart, intelligent students that aren't going to fit into that normal, you've got to follow this particular script. How do we support them? Math is a really important one because if you're not coming to the class every day, you're going to miss certain steps, right? Well, if you're in an online environment where now the educator or our education system is tutoring that process, they can move along as they're getting engaged in this online system. And so math is a great place where we can start increasing their grade levels quickly once they're inspired and once they have a chance in the right environments to kind of move along in those kind of online and really hybrid kind of settings. So I think we have to start rethinking the process of how do we match for that particular student, right? One of my favorite conversations with a student was when I was sitting with an assistant principal and a student walked in and just announces, "How many times do I have to get suspended before you finally kick me out of school?" And it was like, wait, what? Well, I didn't choose to be here. This is what I wanted to do. And at the time, we had a program where for those students that had been either pushed out or they just stepped out, we were creating recovery programs where they could come in and start preparing for a GED even while they're in high school. And if they were already past high school, we had the college in there at the same time and just created a place where there was a tutorial session to help build back the skill sets they needed to go further to pass through that pathway. And so it's like, yes, school is one of these pathways. The GED is another pathway. Getting into the 2-year college and doing some adult high school can be another way to go through. But then so are our CTE programs, so are our work and school kind of programs. There's so many different options that I think we need to be more open to that. Something that's going to hold their attention, engage them, but also create places where they feel they belong and where they can thrive becomes a really big issue. One of my questions has always been, if you're not doing well in school and you're trying and you're not doing well, at some point it becomes self-defeating behavior to keep on going back to a place where you're not feeling connected, you're not feeling you belong, and you're not feeling capable. So how do we think in those terms to say, well, A, how do I help build your capability and the relational base, but maybe also how do we connect you with other learning channels and other systems that may support you in a way that matches better with your particular needs?
I so appreciate you calling that out. I mean, as adults, we're comfortable, many of us at least, saying what we think our strengths are and saying where we think, we in environments in which we know we can't really thrive.
Mhm.
And yet, for a lot of students, there's still kind of a one size fits all structure to their school day. And it's not surprising that some students perform better in that environment than others.
Yeah. And it's hard too because again, the information's out there. So they're learning in so many different places. They're learning about things, they're learning about the world, much more information than we ever had at their age, right? And so they see the world. So we can't just say, "Oh, this is important." It's like, really? Because look at what do you see what's happening outside outside these walls? That meaninglessness, that uncertainty, the disruption. And so we have to kind of connect with that in a way to give them some meaning and some purpose that can go beyond that. And so that's part of the process we need to do. But as you said, I think we need to also start thinking in a more flexible way about the different ways we can support them in learning what they need to get. It's like, what are the benchmarks they need to reach? What are the multiple ways that they can test out to show that they've learned or met those benchmarks? I think that's where the piece is that we need to start thinking about.
Yeah, and importantly, I know for a long time there were these debates about whether you had rigor or you had this sort of flexibility, and somehow those were mutually exclusive. And it doesn't have to be, right? You can have very rigorous academics delivered in a different way or experienced in a different way.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So, following this question on sort of beneficial absence, I want to come back and sort of address this question about chronic absenteeism as it impacts particularly vulnerable students. So students um, who may come from lower income backgrounds, who have uh, difficulties at home.
Mhm.
And what do we see? I think like so many issues in education, chronic absenteeism can be disproportionately negative for that population of students. Can you say a little bit about why and what we can do to overcome the obstacles that lead to these effects?
Well, I think, that out of time, out of school, that disconnection is a significant issue, right? Because they need to be connected somewhere. And when they're spending lots of time alone, they're online, things can happen. They can get connected into some really bad situations, some bad relational pieces. In our case, it was a student with a disability who just didn't show up to their school one day and was just on the street when there were some gang shootings and they got killed, right? There's awful things that can happen when youth aren't in places where they have adult supervision and support. So we really do need to be thinking strategically about making sure that everyone is in this kind of safe kind of environment is a critical issue. And I think that this is where the school counselors and the social workers become critical, because they've, in school counseling, we call it tier three services, as you know. So it's that wraparound supports and how do we think about what the needs are of that family. One of my school counselors that I'm training, their school, they've got credit cards ready. So when the family indicates that there's some food insecurities, they're able to give them some money to get some food for that day. I mean, there's things that we have to do differently, and have to be responsive, right, to the full range of supports that are needed within the community and the families that we're serving. And so that kind of personalized touch means we have to get connected with them, right? We have to find a way to connect with the families, that trust, that support, and be thinking more broadly as a community about how we can provide the resources and to really support their needs.
Yeah.
Now, I think we can talk about the check and connect if you'd like at this point too, because I think that's one of the ways, at least has been research and evidence-based to really showcase how this goes. So I think many of you've heard about the check and connect, and we've got some resources for you on that. But it's a very strong evidence-based practice. So the What Works Clearinghouse is one of the very first ones that made it up to that gold standard. And it's basically how, when we have students that are chronically absent, there's a whole template of how we're getting to the house, connecting with the family, building a plan together with the family, and that there's that immediacy when the student doesn't come back in, that there's someone reaching out and finding out what's happening. So it's not like this kind of anonymity, this sort of nobody cares, nobody's attending, nobody's watching. We break that down by having this immediate kind of response system, and it's one that builds with the family. So we're trying to support them, as well as our needs with the students. So it's not coming out to penalize. It's going out to connect and learn more with them. And they've got training programs, and there's things that to become specialized in it as well. But it's something that the schools that have invested in it, they're improving. What's happening. There's other systems out there, and things like like IntelliSpark is one of those where we can track the students, and we have a whole community that can work on that system to say if they're not in, what's happening, is there some things happening, but we can communicate now as a community to make sure that someone is connecting, or everyone's aware of what may be going on with that student. So these are the ways that I think what we're doing is we're trying to create more support, and more something that the students can actually see and feel, that there are people in their lives that really are interested in them, and are reaching out when it feels like they're going off the rails or they're not making it in. So I think that's one of the areas. There was a second one we had in there too. Maybe we can bring up now too. This was the one from Harvard, and Tricia, you can put it, maybe if you put it in, maybe re-putting it in. But this Harvard group just put together a simple Excel file where every educator in the building, and by every educator, I'm talking custodians, I'm talking about all the workers in the building, right? Everyone who's there writes down which students they have a connection with. And it allows the school counselor to immediately see which students have no one on that list, right? And so what that allows us to do is figure out who's isolated. We can get some peer related supports in there, some peer group activities going on. We can like assign adults to reach out. We can make sure that the things are happening to make sure that every single child on that list is accounted for. And so I think that's one of the ways too that I think is an effective tool that we can use. What's great about it is we can do it for most of the students in the building that are coming back. We can do it right at the beginning of the year. But after that first month of school, like right about now, would be great to go back in and see, okay, for all the students we have that have come in, have they built a connection with some adult in the building? And that's really important. And I use it all because I found, like, when our students with special needs, and you've got some students that just need that walk around the building, right? It's the custodian who may have that special relationship. And we want to really support that it's a whole community in that building that's really making this work. And so we want to make sure we really value the roles that everybody can play.
Scott, one of our colleagues had just posted in the Q&A that there's a national program called Communities in Schools. It's
Mhm.
widely used in West Virginia, focuses on connections and building relationships with students and their families. Do you throw you a curveball here, but do you know much about Communities in Schools? And for those who may not be familiar, can you maybe tell us a little bit about it?
I know some. I worked with the Institute for Education Leadership in DC, worked with them for many years, and they have a large contingent. I know that there's different variations going on, so I'm not sure if they're the ones connected with IEL or with other groups, But absolutely, those are fantastic. Anything that's building that community, the home community, that parents feel like they belong within the system. We have a welcome place when parents walk in. We have an assigned person who really connects with the parents and make sure we have some activities with them. But also by community, how do we get our workforce in there? How do we get our employers connected? How do we get dental, healthcare, other kinds of resources in there? There's a City Connects program that's also similar to that does exactly those things, where they treat the school as sort of the community hub. And so now they're bringing in all of those different support resources into the building, so that everyone has access. And those are exciting programs. So all of these have something in common, right? Which is building the relational base, so that families see that we're working as a team, to really support each other on the process.
Yeah, a recurring theme is the importance of relationship.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Huge.
yeah,
We can't underestimate its power and its value. It's just huge.
yeah. Leon, thanks for that comment. We really appreciate it. So, Scott, I think one of the other things that's certainly been on my mind, and I suspect college professors deal with this too, which is that now that there's so much infrastructure in place for remote learning, a lot of students feel like they can
Mhm.
just do it on their own. Like they can stay home, they don't have to go to lecture, they can watch a video, they can read the materials. Um, so, is there any merit to that argument that being physically present just doesn't matter that much?
Well, there needs to be some physical connection, right? And there needs to be some of that. I think the online learning can help for learning about something. But learning what to do with it, learning how to apply it, takes conversation, it takes project-based learning, it takes group work, teamwork, and all of those things. We know that in the world of work today, the small group is critical, and we know that the durable skills, what Castle calls social emotional learning skills, and we've all adopted some form of that. Those are the human skills that every business is saying they need. The only way those human skills are going to develop is in those relational dynamics. So it's a both and. Yes, there's a lot we can learn through online, and there's some efficiencies we can get there. And we need to have relational connections, and maybe it's done through projects, work-based projects, the CTE programs, and things like that. Because they have to learn how they can apply what they've learned, but they also have to learn how they can connect with others, in that learning experience.
No, I think that's actually a really important point is the connecting with others. And maybe that is a good segue into just a question about instructional practice. Because, I mean, if you're talking about a lecture, that's one-way communication, it's pretty easy to replace that with a recording. If you're
Hmm.
talking about a project-based learning experience, it's much harder to replace that. And so, do you have any advice for faculty, teaching faculty who are on this call, like what they could do, in their classes that would make the need to be present more, make that more profound for students?
Well, I think it has to be stated up front, kind of what the opportunities are going to be for if there is some online, what those opportunities are, and then what the in-person or the group activities expectations are. So it has to be kind of a hybrid, type of piece. Zoom is great when we're working on a project and we know what our roles are and we're reporting, but it's not great for brainstorming. It's not great for reading the room and seeing how people, the kind of the nonverbal cues. It's very challenging for something like that. So there are points at which the kind of online or even synchronous, Zoom type of things, just isn't going to be enough. We have to have that more in-person, interpersonal type piece. One way we can do this and let's say we're focusing now as a school level, is to have benchmarks for those durable skills. What are the skill sets we want them to be able to see? And it's not just that they can communicate with others. We want them to be leading some activities. We want them to be demonstrating the empathy. We want them to be demonstrating things. So to reach those skill sets, right, they're going to need to have some kind of in-person or some kind of more personal, kinds of interactions. And so it gives meaning to why we're coming together, because there's skill sets that connect to the world of work. And this is the way that they're going to have to be able to demonstrate that they've learned those. So there could be some ways that we could design things in more like that as well.
Yeah, I feel like some of these conversations are ones that I'm having around the dinner table every night. I've got 16 and 17-year-old in the house who I think ask some of these same questions of me. Like, why do I need to be there? I can go on to Canvas. I can get all of the assignments. I can do all of this work. You know, I don't like to wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning to get to the school
Yes,
bus. And I don't
right.
like to wake up with them at 6 o'clock in the morning either. So I, I can understand.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's a challenge. And these are smart kids. It's like they have access to a lot of information. So, when my son was deciding he wasn't going to take the standardized test, he had a whole rationale for it that you couldn't disagree with because it's like, I got it. I see where you're at, and I know I'm not going to be able to change that mindset, right? And so there's kind of that emotional sense of that. And so these are smart kids, and they only get smarter as they get access to things. So we have to. There is a sense where we have to up our game to really help get a better sense. It's not just because you should. It's not because everyone has always done it this way. It's not
Yeah.
because it's good for you. There has to be more depth to our explanation, and I think the depth comes from their self-discovery, right, of why this is important. And so for me, it's about using what we call the individualized learning plans, and every state has their own naming convention. So we call it MyCap or My Career and Academic Plan here in Massachusetts. But this idea of helping youth discover their talent and then look at the different goals and possibilities out there in the world, and using UN Sustainable Development Goals as a great foundation for thinking about how I want to have an impact in this world. How do I want to address all this disruption and chaos? We've got 17 different ones that you can choose from, and in that, all these great things one can do. And what they can find themselves in something that has a global need, a global impact that they can do in their own community, it helps youth really find something they can attach to. And I think those are the kinds of things that now it's like, well, how do I get there? Well, math becomes important, writing becomes important, leadership, teamwork becomes important. All of these elements now have a different meaning because I, as a youth, have discovered the role that this all plays, right? And it just goes back to the adage that when we try to give our youth advice, they've never listened ever. Socrates and Plato complained about no one listening, not all the critical thinking skills were going away. So everyone's complained about the generation never listening to the older generation. Okay, we got that down. We know that doesn't work. So how do we help create that self-discovery and providing kind of those structured experiences so they can come to terms with what they want to do in this world, and that they can do so many things in this world. There's so many things that they can create, and we need them. We need this next generation to start stepping up because we've got problems that have to get solved.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Question for you about the effect of absenteeism on the students who are actually present. And thinking about how a student who doesn't come to class and the fact that they're not there to contribute to the conversation or to contribute to or to participate live in that learning experience isn't just negatively impacting that one student, right? It's impacting everybody in the room. Can you talk a little bit about the impacts on the other students and even on the teacher?
Well, it's certainly, when I was working in Milwaukee, they actually had me spend a week during my break from college teaching in the classroom so I could get a really good experience of what that's like when so many students aren't showing up on a given day. It completely disrupts the lesson plans, right? So as a teacher, it's very stressful because you're trying to get through the material, and I think that's a problem too. That we got to get through so much material each week, right? And so we're so focused on that. And so when students aren't showing up, it's impossible to kind of keep on the same trajectory. And that's frustrating, it's difficult, it's challenging. And I just think the nonverbal on the face of the educator is going to make it real clear to the student, I'm really upset that, that you weren't here, right? That we got to teach this again. That also has an impact on students that are wanting to learn because now that disruption impacts them as well because they may be focused on wanting to learn that material, and now it's slowing down. It's not getting them to the places they want to go. So that's one area. I also think though the interpersonal dynamics is students care about each other. And so when you have students not showing up and not coming in, what's that about? And so now that can be a worry sensation. It can be not focusing because I'm wondering what happened to somebody. So I think it can have the relational dynamic can be struggling as well. But then there's also the sense of if people aren't showing up and no one's talking about it and no one's making anything happen, what does that mean in terms of my worth in this world, right? What does that mean if I were the one who didn't do that? And so there's also a sense of just that self-worth, the sense of dignity, the sense of I belong somewhere, I'm important, I'm valuable. There's a lot of communications that can happen with that. And the same thing goes for educators. Like when they're not showing up, it's like, wait a minute, it feels like a lack of respect that I'm here trying to do all this work and you're not even letting me know or not informing me or kind of coming in. I mean, I make sure I made it very clear to my program of students in school counseling that you're in a professional training program and I expect you to act as professionals. You're not in school anymore. you're in professional training. So if you are late, if you aren't going to make it, I need an email. I need to know, and you had better not be late and not showing up very often, because this is, again, a training program that I need to sign off on. And it's made a world of difference changing those expectations, and having and using some tools to kind of manage, making sure they're there when they need to be there and things like that. So there is something about the showing up that's important, and can have multiple effects in terms of how students view themselves and view the world.
Just the way that you're describing that is sort of interesting. Going back to what you said about students caring about one another,
Mhm.
is there actually a germ of a practice in there that we can sort of like um, pull on, where you've got, if the students are caring about one another, um, can we get them to care about the fact that not showing up is negatively impacting their peers' learning, or is that just a bridge too far, you think?
I think we have to go more to the individual personalized issues of
Mm,
what's going on for that individual, right? Yes, I think the peers can be a great way to have that kind of encouraging quality to want to be there.
yeah.
And certainly when they're missed and all of that is a really important piece. And that works for many students that are there for the social environment and they feel like, here's where my friends are, so I need to be there if I want to be connected. That's a very powerful thing. And we can improve that by making sure we're focusing on our school climate, right? So that everyone feels safe and feels a sense of belonging. And that often happens in the work we've done, and as you know, with the scholar-centric work we've done, it really comes with having these authentic conversations with youth about their future, their skills, their opportunities, what it's going to take to be successful. But we're doing it in a way that we're learning about them and they're learning about us as educators. And in that classroom environment, students start to really connect with one another. They start to look out for one another. They get excited about each other in terms of the goals that they might have. So that kind of focusing on the relational base and just changes the sense of climate because we're creating a sense of belonging within that system. So that's one thing we can have some control over, but we also have so many different reasons why students aren't showing up, and so we have to really attack it from the angle of personalized and individualized, attention to each one. So we can take a look at that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so coming back to this, where we started around COVID and how COVID may have changed a lot of the dynamics that are leading to absenteeism from school, from work, from
Hmm.
social engagements. Um, what thoughts do you have about um, whether schools can be expected to make as much progress in addressing absenteeism as they're being asked to make now? I mean, I do want to highlight, as I asked that question, that Leanne's comment earlier about communities and schools, she was talking
Hmm.
about her school
Hmm.
had chronic absenteeism rates at 23% last year and has dropped to 8% this year. So it feels like
We
something
can.
must have changed,
We
right?
can.
So, all
No,
right.
I,
So,
I, I agree, but I think part of the challenge is that we have to recognize that we as educators have gone through all the trauma and the disruption, right? And then we're being asked to put more pressure on getting the grade levels up. We got to get them back to learning. All of that takes time away from stepping back and just connecting because we're so focused on needing to get through the work. And when we don't have the energy, because we're already feeling stressed, we've lost our staff, we don't have our paras as much anymore. We have all of these different challenges going on. It's hard. I mean, I want to just say it's really tough. So we've got to figure out a way to bring that together as a whole school, not just an individual educator, to really think about ways that we can create that infrastructure where there is a sense of that belonging and support. And there's different things one can do. I think, one of the things we did in our school, and we really did address the chronic truism or the chronic absenteeism and the whole retention rate improved tremendously when we started building in these kind of conversations and things. But we also did other things. We would have poetry jams in the hallways during lunch periods, right? They'd get up with the microphone and off they would go. There was ways for them to express themselves, but it also created a sense of spontaneity that there's something happening in the school that I can't miss because you just don't know on a given day what's about to happen. We would have school dances happening as they're leaving school. So they'd have a 40-minute little dance thing that they could do with music and everything else before they headed out. Things that just made the school different. And again, the spontaneity, but also a way of just saying we're trying to design opportunities for you to connect, opportunities for you to enjoy yourself, but also opportunities to express yourself in different ways. And so I think there are things we can do, but we have to emotionally we have to have the emotional wherewithal and kind of be ready to try on some new things.
So I have, a question just about how widespread this issue of chronic absenteeism is, and I want to reflect it in just the audience that we have today is representative of small rural public schools, large urban public schools, independent schools. So it's a really broad group of folks who are joining today, and I think it's interesting. So it cuts across geography, it cuts across demography. Some schools have made real progress on these issues and others haven't. So is there something that the research might tell us about what the common attributes are of schools where absenteeism is largely under control? And could it really be as simple as relationship? We come back to a lot today.
Well, the thing is that what causes chronic absenteeism may be different than what solves it. Right? That's kind of the point that I'm making. We do need to understand the causes because we have to empathize. We have to think about the support structures that might be needed for that family. There may be some very specific things that need to occur. But what we can control is that when they're in the school, how do we create a place where they want to belong and where they want to be, right? That's the part that we can start to do. This is a major issue across the whole country. The absentee rates are high still. States are concerned about it. The NAEP scores are declining. We know that the learning is, we've lost a lot of learning. So there's just this kind of tension around students that our students right now are not as well prepared as the students from a few years ago of the same age. So there's a lot of concern, and we just have to, one, not make it anyone's fault or any kind of fault. It's about the context that's shifted. But we do have to get in and figure out what's happening with each individual and figure out how, as a school and as a community, we want to create a system where we can connect and really work with people in a way that can make this happen. And just to extend on that, it doesn't have to just be the school alone. We have many youth-serving community organizations, even in our rural settings, that are ready to connect with us in helping support. And it can be, we had a community-based organization that was helping us connect with those students, finding out what was happening. Where are they? We even had, as they were coming back in the school after they'd been out for a while, we had a place where they could go inside the community-based organization to get reconnected, get their stuff ready. So then when they went back to the school, they were going in and like once a month, everybody would come back in. So the teachers weren't constantly being bombarded with students that were in and out and in and out. So we're trying to provide some kind of structure and support for it. But coming up with more community-based interventions and supports can also help manage through that. But the reality is that we can't say that any community is doing really well. And I'm excited as some schools are figuring this out and doing great things. We need to get that out and let people see what they've done and how they can do it, because I do believe those are the answers. But yeah, we can't underestimate the challenge that we're having in this space. It's a significant and troubling issue.
Yeah, for sure. And it feels like that there's just a number of themes that have come up again and again in the conversation today around helping students to understand or where they can gain durable skills at school through this kind of team collaboration that's hard to do online, how you can
Yep.
convey a sense of belonging and relationship by just some simple activities like helping schools to map where there might be gaps between students who feel connected and don't, just by literally having students tell us whether they have a relationship with an adult in the building. Um,
Yeah.
any closing thoughts? We're approaching the end of the hour here.
Yeah. To basically give ourselves permission to learn how to learn through this and not feel like we're doing something wrong, or we're not caring enough, or we're not investing enough. I think we all have to start thinking in new ways. We have to start adapting to the new realities that we have. And I think we need to bring in other people, other community organizations, and other support systems that are great at working with our youth to help us think through this. And then we have to really look at our resources, as limited as they are, to make sure we're getting enough access to the counseling and mental health supports, that we're getting access to the kinds of community resources they might need. And so finding a way for the school or the district to become that hub for a lot of those resources and supports, I think, can be really powerful. But it's going to take some rethinking and redesigning. And then the last one is instead of thinking about time on learning, let's figure out what the benchmarks of having learned, right? What are we getting to? And allow students to find different pathways to get to those. If every if every student and parent knows at the beginning of the year, here's the expectations and the benchmarks they need to reach, there's multiple ways they can get there. And there's multiple ways they can communicate that they've done that. So more of a universal design for learning approach, which I think can really be helpful in this space as well, can be great. But we need to know what is it we're trying to get to. And I believe many of our students can reach that in many different ways. And for many, it will be coming to school and being there. But for others, there may be other opportunities that they can help, almost like they can come up with a contract with the school in terms of how they're going to reach those benchmarks, and what they're going to do. So making it more of a constructive process with the families, as we go forward.
Terrific. Scott, as always, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us and with our audience today.
Well, yeah, I appreciate it. And also, this is complex, and I hope that's what we're getting is this is not a simple, here's the solution, right? It's more of a how can we problem solve? How can we come up with ideas, and support? So it's a very challenging time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So thanks again to everybody for joining us today. And please do watch your email for the link to the recording. Please share it with your colleagues who might want to see it but couldn't join us today. And please visit intellispark.com/webinars to check out on-demand versions of past webinars and to find out about upcoming events. And if you want to find out more about IntelliSpark's capabilities for helping you address absenteeism, you can email me directly at stephen.smith@intellispark.com or complete the online form at intellispark.com/contact. And we'll get right back to you. Everybody have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you so much.
All right, take care, everybody.